It's exactly 2 a.m. on December 30th, 1884. A heavy, stifling humidity hangs over the small, frontier capital of Austin, Texas. Inside a modest wooden outbuilding behind a grand home on West Pecan Street, a young woman named Mollie Smith is fast asleep. She is a hard-working servant girl, completely exhausted from a long day of labor. The town around her is absolutely dead silent. Suddenly, the rusted iron latch on her back window slowly, quietly clicks upward. A large hand slides the frame open. Within seconds, a tall silhouette slips through the window, moving with terrifying stealth across the floorboards. He doesn't make a sound. He stands over her bed in the pitch black. What followed in that yard moments later was a scene of such raw, breathless brutality that it shattered the frontier peace of Texas forever. Mollie is forcefully dragged from her bed, out into the freezing mud of the dark backyard. Hours later, her employer wakes up to the sound of a gate swinging loose in the wind. He walks outside with a kerosene lantern, shining the light onto the damp grass, and drops his lamp in pure horror. Mollie has been savagely attacked with a sharp object, her body left in a precise, deliberate position. The killer didn't steal anything. He didn't enter the main mansion. He targeted the vulnerable. He moved like a phantom, and as the town bells began to ring, local authorities realized a monster had just stepped out of the dark. Within weeks, the initial confusion inside the Austin Police Department mutated into absolute, suffocating terror. The attack on Mollie Smith wasn't an isolated incident. It was the opening bell of a systematic slaughter. Over the course of 1985, the exact same terrifying pattern repeated with brutal frequency across the city grid. The predator targeted women in their sleep, specifically targeting servant girls living in detached backyard quarters. City Marshal grooms redeployed every available deputy, but they found themselves operating inside a complete forensic vacuum. This predator was meticulously organized. He struck only on moonlit nights, left zero witnesses alive, and vanished into the unpaved alleyways before a single alarm could be raised. The local newspapers labeled him the Servant Girl Annihilator, and the frontier town descended into a state of absolute psychological siege. Citizens completely stopped walking the streets after dusk. Neighborhoods formed armed vigilante groups, patrolling the dark dirt roads with loaded rifles and lanterns. The city council even voted to install massive 150-foot moonlight towers to flood the entire city with artificial light to burn away the shadows. But the Annihilator was completely unfazed. He kept striking, moving closer to the affluent neighborhoods, proving that the law was completely powerless to protect its own citizens. The terror reached its absolute, catastrophic breaking point on Christmas Eve, 1885. The Annihilator decided that the servant quarters were no longer his only boundary. He wanted to strike at the very heart of Austin's elite class. In a single, breathless night, the killer breached two separate high society homes simultaneously. First, he targeted Eula Phillips, the beautiful 17-year-old wife of a prominent local citizen. Less than an hour later, across town, he entered the home of Susan Hancock, a highly respected, elegant woman sleeping in her bedroom. Both women were forcefully dragged out into their respective backyards and targeted with the same clinical, terrifying precision. The double homicide on Christmas Eve broke the absolute psyche of the city. The panic turned into a riotous fury. The police arrested hundreds of suspects, including the victims' own husbands and local drifters, but the evidence never matched. The timeline was impossible. Then, just as the city braced itself for an inevitable modern trial, the murders stopped. The clock struck January 1886, and the Servant Girl Annihilator simply dissolved into the wind, leaving behind 8 verified victims and a city permanently scarred by the dark. For 3 long years, the mystery of the Austin Night Terror remained a cold, frustrating riddle in the Texas archives. But in the late summer of 1888, Thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, a brand new nightmare woke up. In the foggy, crowded slums of Whitechapel, London, an unidentified serial killer began targeting women in the dead of night with an identical psychological precision. They called him Jack the Ripper. When news of the London horrors crossed the Atlantic and hit the desks of Texas investigators, a chilling, historic realization began to take shape. Modern criminal historians and early detectives noted the staggering, impossible similarities between the two crime sprees. Both killers targeted vulnerable women in their sleep or on the street. Both killers used signature, surgical strikes with sharp blades, completely avoiding detection in heavily patrolled areas. Most tellingly, a wealthy American investigator tracking suspects in London noted that a specific, transient individual who had been working as a servant cook in Austin during the 1885 murders had boarded a transatlantic vessel to England shortly after the Texas attack stopped. Did the Servant Girl Annihilator simply pack his tools, change his moniker, and cross the ocean to become the most famous ghost in forensic history? Today, the horrific files of the Servant Girl Annihilator remain permanently open, an unyielding, freezing void in the annals of global true crime. Because the tragedy played out over a century ago, the physical records, the handwritten police logs, and the suspects have all turned to dust, leaving behind a permanent riddle. The case serves as a profoundly dark reminder that the architecture of a serial predator doesn't belong to a single city or a single country. Mollie, Eula, Susan, and the other victims in Austin deserve to be remembered not as a historical footnote or a prelude to a London myth, but as real, living souls whose futures were brutally stolen in the dark of a Texas night. By pulling their stories out of the public domain archives and sharing them in our digital spaces, we ensure that their humanity is preserved and that the shadows can never fully hide the truth. The frontier has long been paved over, but the echo of those moonlit nights continues to whisper through history. I want to hear from you guys on this. Do you believe the Servant Girl Annihilator and Jack the Ripper were the exact same traveling phantom, or did two separate monsters independently terrorize the world in the 1880s? Let's start a conversation down in the comments below, and please keep the discussion deeply respectful of the history. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, look out for one another, and I'll see you in the next deep dive. Bye.